I chose holding Robert's hand for 7 more days over having a roof over my head. An 8-year-old widow walks in to judge Judy's courtroom on what appears to be a routine small claims case about unpaid rent totaling $2,541. She's wearing a simple floral dress that's been carefully pressed, clutching a worn leather purse against her chest, and moving slowly with the help of a wooden cane. Her hands tremble as she takes her seat at the defendant's table. Her eyes are red and swollen from crying. This is Margaret Sullivan, and within the next few minutes, she's going to make a confession so devastating, so heartbreaking that Judge Judy will do something she's never done in 28 years of television. She will stand up from her bench, walk away in complete silence, and an entire courtroom will realize they're not witnessing a simple legal dispute. They're witnessing a tragedy that exposes the cruelty of America's healthcare system and the impossible choices that millions of elderly people face every single day. The plaintiff is 62-year-old David Morrison, a landlord who owns a small 12-unit apartment building in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. But he's not just any landlord. David Morrison was Margaret's deceased husband's best friend for over 50 years. They served together in Vietnam in 1968. They survived Demong together. They came home together. And for 43 years, Margaret and her husband Robert lived in David's building, paying rent on time every single month without fail. Until 3 months ago, Margaret stopped paying. She stopped answering David's calls. She stopped coming to the door when he knocked. And now David Morrison, despite the pain it causes him, despite the friendship that spans half a century, has been forced to sue the widow of his best friend for $2,541 in unpaid rent. What nobody in that courtroom knows yet, what David Morrison himself doesn't know, is why Margaret stopped paying. And when she finally reveals the truth, it will break everyone's heart. Before we reveal what Margaret confessed, that left Judge Judy completely speechless, I need you to hit that subscribe button right now. Less than 4% of you watching are actually subscribed. And this story about sacrifice, dignity, and the impossible decisions our elderly face needs to reach everyone. If you believe our senior citizens deserve better than this, if you've ever watched a loved one struggle with devastating medical costs, if you think the system is broken, subscribe right now, because what happens in the next few minutes will shatter you and then give you hope again. This isn't just about one widow. This is about the millions of Americans who are one medical emergency away from losing everything they've spent their entire lives building. Margaret Sullivan and Robert Sullivan met in 1964 at a church social in Brooklyn. She was 22 years old, a young elementary school teacher, with her whole life ahead of her. Robert was 24, working for the Postal Service and building a future one paycheck at a time. They fell in love over shared dreams of a simple, honest life. They married in 1965 in a small ceremony with close family and friends. For 58 years, they built that life together. Margaret taught second grade for 35 years, shaping young minds and loving every moment of it. Robert delivered mail for 40 years, rain or shine, always with a smile for the people on his route. They never bought anything they couldn't afford. They clipped coupons. They saved every spare dollar. They drove the same car for 15 years. They took modest vacations, and over those 58 years of careful living and patient saving, they accumulated $127,000 in their retirement account. It wasn't a fortune, but it was theirs. It represented security, peace of mind, maybe something to leave their grandchildren. It represented decades of sacrifice and discipline. They had 2 children. Their daughter Sarah died in a car accident in 1998, a loss that nearly destroyed them both. Their son Michael moved to California years ago, and the relationship grew distant over time. 5 grandchildren exist that Margaret barely knows because geography and family tensions created walls too high to climb. But Margaret and Robert had each other. and in their rent-controlled one-bedroom apartment at $847 a month, surrounded by photos and memories of 58 years together, they were content. David Morrison, Robert's brother, in every way but blood, owned the building and had always treated them like family. He never raised their rent more than absolutely necessary. When repairs were needed, David handled them personally. When times were tough, he gave them grace. This was more than a landlord-tenant relationship. This was family. This was love built over decades of shared history and mutual respect. 18 months ago, everything changed. Robert Sullivan was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months to live, maybe 9 if they were lucky, but there was an experimental treatment available. It wasn't FDA approved for his stage of cancer. Medicare wouldn't cover it. Private insurance denied the claim immediately. But the treatment offered hope. It offered the possibility of more time. It cost $8,400 every single month. And Margaret Sullivan, looking at her husband of 58 years, the man who had loved her through the death of their daughter, through every joy and every sorrow, made a decision that would cost her everything. She decided that Robert's life was worth more than their savings. She decided that every extra day with him was worth any price. She had no idea that this decision would eventually lead her to Judge Judy's courtroom. Facing eviction from the only home she'd known for 43 years, drowning in debt and completely alone. For 16 months, Margaret Sullivan paid for that experimental treatment. Every single month, $8,400 went to the medical center. She watched their life savings evaporate like water in the desert sun. The first payment brought their account down to $118,600, then $110,200, then $93,400, month after month. The number got smaller while Robert got a little more time. Margaret never complained. She never hesitated. She sat with Robert during every treatment session, holding his hand through the nausea and pain, reading him his favorite books, playing music from their wedding day. She made sure he was never afraid, never alone, never doubted for a single second that he was worth every penny. After 8 months, the savings account hit zero, completely empty. 58 years of careful saving, gone. But Robert was still alive, still fighting, still squeezing her hand every morning when he woke up. So Margaret did what millions of desperate Americans do when medical bills exceed their means. She started using credit cards. 5 different cards applied for and approved based on her decent credit score and teaching pension. She maxed them out one by one. $5,000 on the first card, $8,000 on the second, $7,000 on the third. The bills kept coming and she kept paying because stopping the treatment meant watching Robert die faster, and she couldn't do that. She absolutely could not do that. 3 months ago, Margaret faced a choice that still haunts her every night. She had exactly $847 in her checking account. The rent was due. Robert's treatment was due. She could not pay both. She sat at their small kitchen table, the same table where they'd eaten breakfast together for 43 years, and she made a decision. She paid for Robert's treatment. She chose her husband over her home. She chose 7 more days of holding his hand over keeping a roof over their heads. And then she did it again the next month and the month after that. Each month, she opened the door to find David Morrison's rent notices piling up. Each month, she heard him knocking, calling her name, asking if she was okay. But she couldn't face him. She couldn't explain that she was choosing to become homeless rather than let Robert die one day sooner. The shame was crushing. The guilt was overwhelming, but the love was stronger than both. Robert Sullivan died 8 weeks ago. In their bedroom, in the bed they'd shared for 58 years with Margaret, holding his hand and whispering that she loved him. He'd lived 7 months longer than the original prognosis. 7 months, that cost. $127,000 in savings, and $31,000 in credit card debt. 7 months that cost Margaret her financial security, her home, and her future. The funeral was small. David Morrison came confused about why Margaret had been avoiding him. Heard that his best friend's widow had shut him out. Michael flew in from California for 2 days and left without really connecting. The grandchildren sent flowers, and when everyone left, Margaret returned to an apartment filled with memories and drowning in debt. The credit card bills arrived daily. The eviction notice came 2 weeks after Robert's funeral. And now she's sitting in Judge Judy's courtroom about to lose the last piece of her life with Robert. Judge Judy looks up from her notes, her expression professional but not unkind. The courtroom is full, as it always is, with people waiting for their own cases and regular viewers who watch every session. David Morrison sits at the plaintiff's table, visibly uncomfortable, his hands clasped tightly together. He's wearing a simple suit that's slightly too big for him, like he's lost weight from stress. When Judge Judy calls the case, her voice cuts through the room with that familiar authority. Mr. Morrison, you're suing Mrs. Margaret Sullivan for unpaid rent in the amount of $2,541 covering 3 months. Plus, you're seeking possession of the apartment. Tell me why you brought this case. David Morrison stands slowly, and the pain in his voice is obvious to everyone listening. Your Honor, Margaret Sullivan has been my tenant for 43 years. But more than that, her husband Robert was my best friend. We served in Vietnam together. We were brothers. I loved Robert like family, and I love Margaret like family too. His voice cracked slightly. But she hasn't paid rent in 3 months. I've tried calling her. I've knocked on her door dozens of times. She won't talk to me. Won't explain what's happening. I have property taxes that went up 40% this year. I have my own medical bills for diabetes and heart problems. I can't afford to carry tenants who don't pay, even if they're family, especially when they won't even talk to me about it. Judge Judy nods, making notes. Then turns her attention to Margaret. The elderly woman sits perfectly still. Her hands gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles are white. Tears are already streaming down her face, but she makes no sound. Mrs. Sullivan, Judge Judy says. Her tone gentler than usual. Mr. Morrison says, you haven't paid rent in 3 months and won't communicate with him about why. What's your response to this lawsuit? Margaret opens her mouth, but no words come out. She tries again, but only manages a small sob. The courtroom watches in uncomfortable silence as this 8-year-old woman struggles to speak. Judge Judy waits, demonstrating unusual patience. Finally, Margaret whispers something so quietly that even the microphones barely catch it. My husband died. The courtroom shifts. David Morrison's face shows genuine shock. He clearly didn't know the exact timeline. Judge Judy leans forward slightly. Mrs. Sullivan, I'm very sorry for your loss. When did your husband pass away? Margaret's voice is barely audible. 8 weeks ago. Judge Judy's expression softens in a way that courtroom regulars have rarely seen. Mrs. Sullivan, I understand you're grieving. Losing a spouse after 58 years is devastating. But your husband passed away 8 weeks ago, and you stopped paying rent 3 months ago. That means you stopped paying before he died. I need you to help me understand what happened 3 months ago that made you stop paying your rent. Margaret's tears fall faster now, dropping onto her clasped hands. She takes a shaky breath, and when she speaks, her voice trembles, but grows stronger with each word. Your Honor, my Robert was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer 18 months ago. The doctor said he had 6 months to live, maybe 9 if we were very lucky. But there was a treatment, an experimental treatment, that might give him more time. It wasn't FDA approved for his stage. Medicare wouldn't cover it. Our insurance denied the claim, but it might work. It might give us more time together." She pauses, gathering strength. "That treatment cost $8,400 every single month. We had saved $127,000 over our entire lives together. 58 years of being careful with every dollar, of never buying what we couldn't afford, of planning for our retirement. That money was supposed to last us through our old age. It was supposed to be our security." The courtroom has gone completely silent. Even Judge Judy sits perfectly still, listening intently. Margaret continues, her voice breaking. "But when the doctor said this treatment might give Robert more time, I couldn't say no. How do you tell your husband of *58 years that he's not worth the money? How do you choose a bank account over the man you've loved since you were 22 years old? So I paid for the treatment every month. $8,400. I watched our savings disappear. First, it was $120,000, then $100,000, then $80,000. I watched 58 years of our life together drain away month after month. But Robert was still here. He was still holding my hand. He was still telling me he loved me. He was still here." She wipes her eyes with a tissue that's already soaked through. "After 8 months, our savings were gone, completely empty. Every penny we'd saved was gone. But Robert was still alive, and the treatment was working well enough to give us time. So, I did what millions of Americans do when medical bills destroy their savings. I got credit cards, 5 of them. I maxed out every single one, 31,000 total, just to keep paying for his treatment. Because what else could I do? Stop the treatment and watch him die faster." David Morrison sits with his hand over his mouth, his eyes filled with tears. He had no idea. None of this was in the case file. Judge Judy leans back in her chair, processing what she's hearing. Margaret's voice drops to almost a whisper. 3 months ago, I had $847 in my checking account. The rent was due. Robert's treatment was due. I couldn't pay both. I sat at our kitchen table, the same table where we'd eaten breakfast together for 43 years, and I had to choose. Do I pay the rent and keep our home? Or do I pay for the treatment and keep my husband alive a little longer? She looks directly at Judge Judy now, her voice steady despite the tears. "Your Honor, I chose my husband. I chose Robert over our apartment. I chose holding his hand for 7 more days over having a roof over my head. And then I did it again the next month and the month after that. I heard Mr. Morrison knocking on my door. I saw his notices, but I couldn't face him. I couldn't explain that I was choosing to become homeless rather than let Robert die one day sooner. If this story is breaking your heart the way it's breaking everyone's in that courtroom, hit that subscribe button right now, because what Judge Judy does next will restore your faith in humanity. This isn't just about one widow's impossible choice. This is about the millions of elderly Americans facing the exact same decision every single day in the wealthiest country in the world. Subscribe if you believe our system is broken and needs to change. Margaret's voice cracks completely now, but she pushes through. Robert died 8 weeks ago in our bedroom in our bed with me holding his hand. Do you want to know what the cruelest part is? Your Honor, after 16 months of treatment, after spending every penny we had, after going $31,000 into debt, after sacrificing everything we built in 58 years together, Robert lived exactly 7 months longer than they originally predicted. 7 months. I bought him 7 extra months at the cost of our entire life savings and our home. She looks down at her hands. And you want to know what I did with those 7 months? I sat next to him every single day. I held his hand. I read him his favorite books. I played the music from our wedding. I told him stories about when our children were young. I made him laugh even when he was in pain. I made sure he wasn't alone for a single second. I made sure he wasn't afraid. The courtroom is so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Several people in the gallery are openly crying. David Morrison has tears streaming down his face. Margaret takes a final shaky breath. So yes, Mr. Morrison, I owe you $2,541, and I have no way to pay you. I have no savings. I have no credit left. I have my pension of $1,850 a month. And after I pay my utilities and my minimum credit card payments and buy my medications, I have about $400 left. At that rate, it will take me 6 months just to pay you back. And I'll have no money for food. I'm 80 years old. I'm alone. I'm broke. And in 30 days, I'll be homeless. But Your Honor, I would do it all again. Every single penny. Every sacrifice. Because those 7 months of holding Robert's hand while he wasn't afraid, those were worth everything. For the first time in 28 years of television, Judge Judy is completely speechless. She sits perfectly still, staring at Margaret Sullivan with an expression that courtroom veterans have never seen before. Slowly, she removes her glasses and everyone notices that her eyes are glistening with tears. Judge Judy, the woman known for her sharp tongue and no-nonsense attitude, is visibly emotional. The silence stretches for what feels like an eternity. Then, without a word, Judge Judy stands up from her bench. The bailiff looks confused, unsure of protocol. The entire courtroom freezes. In 28 years, this has never happened. Judge Judy walks down from the bench, her robe flowing behind her, and approaches Margaret directly. She places her hand gently on the elderly woman's shoulder, and Margaret looks up with tear-filled eyes. Mrs. Sullivan, Judge Judy says quietly, her voice thick with emotion. Look at me. Margaret meets her gaze and Judge Judy continues. In 28 years of doing this show, I have heard every excuse imaginable for not paying debts. I've heard lies, manipulations, and sob stories designed to get out of responsibility. What you just told me isn't an excuse. It's a tragedy. And it's a tragedy that's happening in thousands of homes across this country every single day. Judge Judy turns to face David Morrison, her voice regaining some of its familiar strength. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think very carefully before you answer. If Robert Sullivan was sitting here instead of his widow, if your best friend from Vietnam was the one who had gone into debt to save Margaret's life, and he came to you and said, David, I spent everything to keep her alive, and now I can't pay rent, what would you have done? David Morrison stands immediately, his voice breaking. I would have told him to forget the rent, Your Honor. I would have told him, Robert, you're my brother. You don't owe me anything. He turns to Margaret, tears streaming down his face. Margaret, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you call me? Robert was my brother. You're my sister. I would have helped. I would have done something. Margaret's voice is barely a whisper. I was ashamed, David. I couldn't keep a roof over our heads. I couldn't even pay $847. Alive. Judge Judy's voice cuts through firmly. Mrs. Sullivan, you didn't fail. The system failed you. A country that forces an 8-year-old woman to choose between her husband's life and her home has failed. A healthcare system that makes life-saving treatment available but not affordable has failed. You didn't fail anyone. You loved your husband enough to sacrifice everything. And that's not failure. That's the kind of love most people only dream about. David Morrison walks over to the defendant's table and does something completely unexpected. He rips up the lawsuit papers right there in front of everyone. Your Honor, I'm dropping this case. Margaret doesn't owe me anything. She never did. I should have checked on her. I should have known something was wrong when she stopped answering. I was so focused on my own problems, on my property taxes, and my medical bills, that I didn't think about what she might be going through. Judge Judy nods slowly. Mr. Morrison, that's very generous of you. But dropping the lawsuit doesn't solve Mrs. Sullivan's *real problem. She still has $31,000 in medical debt and only $400 a month after her expenses. She's still facing homelessness in 30 days. Then, Judge Judy does something absolutely unprecedented. She pulls out her phone right there in the courtroom and makes a call. The entire courtroom watches in stunned silence as she speaks to someone, her voice firm and commanding. "I need you to contact the Patient Advocate Foundation and the National Council on Aging. Immediately get them in touch with Margaret Sullivan by end of day today." She ends the call and looks directly at Margaret. "Mrs. Sullivan, I cannot bring your husband back. I cannot give you back those 58 years or the $127,000 you spent keeping him alive. But I can make absolutely certain that you don't lose your home." Judge Judy's next words send shockwaves through the courtroom. "My show is going to pay your $31,000 medical debt directly to the creditors. Every single penny. You will start next month with a clean slate." Margaret's hands fly to her mouth as she begins sobbing uncontrollably. The gallery erupts in gasps and then spontaneous applause. Judge Judy continues over the noise. "We're also going to cover 6 months of your rent paid directly to Mr. Morrison, to give you time to stabilize your finances and grieve your husband properly without the fear of eviction hanging over your head." David Morrison rushes forward and embraces Margaret tightly. "I'm so sorry," he whispers loud enough for the microphones to catch. "I'm so sorry, I didn't know. Robert would never forgive me if I let you go through this alone." Margaret clings to him. This man who was her husband's brother in every way that mattered. "Robert loved you so much, David. He talked about you until his last day." 6 months later, Margaret Sullivan is still living in her rent control apartment in Bay Ridge, surrounded by 58 years of memories. Her medical debt is completely cleared. She started attending grief counseling, finally processing Robert's death without the crushing weight of financial panic. Her son Michael flew in from California and has been calling weekly, their relationship slowly healing. David Morrison created the Robert Sullivan Memorial Fund in his building, providing rent assistance to elderly tenants facing medical crises, ensuring that no one else suffers in silence the way Margaret did. The video of Margaret's confession and Judge Judy's response has been shared over 30 million times across every platform. Thousands of people commented, sharing their own stories of medical debt destroying their families. Patient advocacy organizations reported a 400% increase in calls from seniors seeking help. Margaret now volunteers at a local hospice center, holding the hands of dying patients and telling them they're not alone, giving to others what she gave to Robert. If Margaret's story moved you, if you believe our elderly deserve better than impossible choices between medicine and rent, share this video right now. Hit that like button if you think Judge Judy did the right thing. Comment below if you or someone you love has faced medical debt, because every comment adds to the conversation about fixing our broken healthcare system. Subscribe for more stories that expose the truth while celebrating the human spirit that refuses to give up. Margaret Sullivan chose love over money. Judge Judy chose compassion over protocol. David Morrison chose forgiveness over anger. And together they showed us that even in our darkest moments, humanity still exists. This is why we share these stories, not just for entertainment, but to change hearts, to change minds, and to change systems, one story at a time.